Right. Well, I want to again thanks everyone for joining us today at the Minnesota Stoics. My name is Tim, and I'm very pleased today to have from Eastern Europe, Sarajevo, David Fideler is with us. And I'm just going to give a little brief bio on David, and then we're going to probably we'll be able to share a little more of his background as we start talking. David is a writer, philosopher, and the editor of the Stoic Insights website. He was born in the United States and currently lives in Sarajevo with his wife and son. His book, Breakfast with Seneca, was published in 2022. And just a note for David, and you probably know this, David, but our group spent many months, I think it was almost 11 months or a year, on Wednesday, every other Wednesday evening studying your book, and it was a great thrill. And I'll just make one comment, David, then I'm going to actually let you say a word or two. But what I found so wonderful about your book was that it kind of created a bridge between an academic writing as well as popular writing. So it was very enjoyable for me to read and to share the highlights with our group. So anyway, welcome, David.
Great. Well, it's great to be here and great to have this opportunity to speak with you. And the time that you spent reading the book was about the time that it took me to write the book. I think actually it was about 14 months in all.
Great. All right. Well, it was very enjoyable. So again, thank you for being here today. So I've got some questions that I have for David. And then, if folks want to mute themselves, that will be great. And then hopefully afterwards we'll have time to discuss. But David, I'm going to jump right in. And if you could tell us a bit about your background and how you became a writer on philosophy.
Okay. Well, the story behind that is that I've actually always been a writer since I was a teenager, and I've just always been involved in the world of words and ideas. And I was actually born into a book publishing family. My dad owned a publishing company and they did social studies textbooks. And then on my mother's side of the family, they owned a printing shop and they published a magazine. So basically I was born with ink in my blood, and I never really aspired to be a writer. In fact, I knew how difficult it was to make a living as a writer. So what I decided to do, perhaps foolishly, was go into publishing instead. And I owned a publishing company for quite a long time. I started it when I was 24 years old, when I got out of school. And I ran that for like 20 years, and I ended up selling it because of financial difficulties in terms of book publishing. It's a very difficult business to be in. And I started another company that produces and designs books for university presses. And by coincidence, actually, one of my longtime clients is the University of Minnesota Press. So I work with people in Minneapolis at a distance, and they've been really great to work with. So, but basically, I was just always very curious when I was a teenager. So I was interested in philosophy and astronomy from a very young age. And it's just something that I pursued. So as much as possible, I tried to pursue the things that I love. So that's how I started writing about philosophy.
Excellent. And from I've been to your website and looked at some of the projects you've got going. A real renaissance. I guess the term Renaissance person would apply to you. And you're interested in art and beauty is, I think, one of your current.
Well, that's true. But actually, it's very interesting because the early Renaissance humanists were incredibly interested in Stoicism. And Seneca was a huge source of philosophical ideas for them. And so this is something that I've been exploring for the past couple of years, basically the influence of Stoicism on Renaissance thought. And it was the Stoic ideas of Seneca and also Cicero that really inspired the project of Renaissance humanism, because they wanted to create a more virtuous society, because the time in which the founder of Renaissance humanism lived was very, very corrupt. and every aspect of society was corrupt. But he was a huge reader of Seneca. And he believed that by recovering the philosophy of the ancient world, it would be possible to create more virtuous people and a more virtuous society. So, without Stoicism, the Renaissance as we know it may not have occurred in exactly that same way, because it was a major inspiration.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Well, now coming up to your book, Breakfast with Seneca, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I had studied Stoicism a bit when I was in my early 20s, and I'd read Marcus Aurelius, but I only really started reading Seneca about 15 years ago. And I just felt a major attraction to Seneca in terms of like his voice and his style of writing, which is very, very attractive. And then the other thing about Seneca, which I think, many readers have experienced, is that he really comes across as someone who knows what he's talking about. And that's actually quite rare in any writer, let alone someone who writes about philosophy. But I just had this very strong feeling that Seneca had, deep firsthand knowledge, and insight about what he was talking about. And I think that's true because he had such a deep level of insight into human nature and human psychology.
Yeah, it's fascinating. When you read Seneca, his voice is so fresh and so contemporary. It's just
Yeah.
almost hard to believe. What was your biggest challenge in writing about Seneca and getting all these materials together, David?
Okay. Well, I think there are two aspects to that. And one is that I had been following modern Stoicism for a good number of years before I started writing the book. I'm not sure how many, maybe 10 years, I'm not sure. And I had gone to the last physical Stoicon in Athens, which was in 2019. And I met some really great people there who I've stayed friends with. And it was just like a mind-blowing experience. And then I came back to Sarajevo and I got the contract to write the book. And I was a bit confused because I didn't really fully understand who the audience or what the audience for modern Stoicism was. So I didn't really understand who I was writing the book for. And the reason why is that there are so many different kinds of people interested in Stoicism. So it wasn't really possible for me to create, like in my mind, like an ideal reader for the book, because I just wasn't able to do that because there's so many different types of people, with so many different types of backgrounds interested in Stoicism. So that was one of the challenges. And the way I addressed that is I just decided in the end, well, I'm going to write the type of book that I would like to read, and I want it to be very, very, accurate historically and in a scholarly sense, because I like Seneca so much that I wanted to write a really faithful account of his ideas. So that was like one of the challenges. And then the other challenge related to that is that because I wanted to write such a faithful account, and I like Seneca, I wanted to really portray his ideas in the most accurate way, is that I created a database of all of his major ideas. And so I took everything that he wrote about all the different ideas and I put it in the database so that I could just call up all of the information for each chapter when I was writing it. And then I went through Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius too, to see what they had to say about those ideas. And I have to say, this probably took at least like 2 solid months, but I am a scholarly researcher and I work in a very methodical way, even though this book was written for a general audience. So my overriding concern was to be faithful to the material, and I really wanted to make sure that I understood exactly what Seneca was saying. And then when I was writing the book, I wanted to have this database so I could pull up all of this information and compare it with the other Stoic thinkers to see, whether they overlapped, how they overlapped, and also have access to all of the best quotations from Seneca. And then what happened is I realized that there was so much material from Seneca. I hadn't really thought this through, that I couldn't possibly quote from other translations. So I found a classics professor at Purdue University in Indiana, and I worked with her to create fresh translations from the Latin and the Greek of all the Stoic writers. So like 99% of the translations in the book are like fresh translations. And that was just so much fun and mind expanding. And then being able to see, word for word what Seneca was saying in Latin and all of that. It was really a wonderful experience. So, but those were like the two biggest challenges that I had.
Yeah, just the amount of material. But sounds like you took a thematic approach to organizing the basic ideas there.
Yeah, well,
Nice job.
you know, it was like, what? I have one chance in my life to write a book about Seneca, and Seneca is an important figure. So I felt a real obligation to do it in, the best and most accurate way possible. So I'm not the type of person who really cuts corners when it comes to like doing research or, just working on writing. I really take it very seriously.
Yeah. Your footnotes were voluminous and very, very helpful. I
Either that
can't
or I
help.
have
Oh,
obsessive compulsive disorder.
well, well, we'll frame it the more positive way. Very
Yeah.
helpful footnotes. I have to say it was inspiring when you kind of set the table, talking about yourself. I think you went to a coffee shop in the morning and you had your coffee and your
Yeah.
Seneca book, and boy, that was a nice setup that you described there.
Yeah, that was here in Sarajevo at this wonderful place with Austro-Hungarian architecture called Hotel Central. And I'd go there for a swim in the morning and exercise. And for some reason, the editor of the book, one of the editors of the book, didn't like the fact that I mentioned swimming, so I had to cut that out. But then I would have these breakfasts and things like that. And actually, just a few months ago, they had closed everything down because of the pandemic. Like a lot of the book was written during the pandemic, and I started going back there again. It wasn't possible to even have breakfast there until relatively recently. And so I went back there and I rejoined. I started swimming again, and I took them a copy of the book to have an official copy of Breakfast with Seneca, because the hotel is featured in the preface to the book.
Oh,
So,
how cool is that? How cool is that? Oh, excellent. Well, what do you think Seneca's greatest gift was, and why is he still so widely read today, David?
mhm. Well, I think it's basically because he was such a great writer, and he just has an incredible gift when it comes to communicating his ideas. And he has this wonderful uh, writing style. And so he'll be talking about something, and then he'll have this whole train of thought, and then he'll like sum it up in a single sentence, which is like an epigram or an aphorism or something like that. And for example, like one of those, which I really like, is when someone doesn't know what port they're sailing towards, then no wind is favorable. So, before he springs that on the reader, he's talking about the importance of having a destination. And then he sums up the idea in like one beautiful line or image. And actually, you find that kind of writing style in Ralph Waldo Emerson as well, who I also really like. And Emerson was a huge reader of Seneca. And I'm pretty convinced that Emerson learned this writing style from Seneca because no one else really uses it in quite the same way.
Interesting. I was not aware of that connection, so that's interesting. Seneca, in his writing, talks a lot about Fortuna, the goddess Fortuna, and the Wheel of Fortune. Can you shed a little light on those ideas for us?
Right. Well, Fortuna is fortune or chance in a sense. So it's the things that occur in the world that are not up to us. So when Seneca is always, when he's talking about Fortuna, he's always talking about virtue versus Fortuna. And this is Seneca's expression in Latin of the dichotomy of control, because it's like Epictetus says, some things are up to us and other things are not. And Seneca is describing exactly the same thing, but he's saying, virtue is our character, and that's up to us. Whereas fortuna, the things that happen in the world that are beyond our control, are not up to us. So Seneca is stating the dichotomy of control. And this became the standard way that Latin writers and Latin philosophers would talk about the dichotomy of control. And so if you go back and read Stoic writers in the Renaissance, and there were Stoic philosophers in the Renaissance, this is exactly the way they describe it as well, as virtue versus fortuna. And fortuna is tricky because you can have bad fortune or bad luck, and you can have very good luck. And one of the things that Seneca wrote about is if you have too much good luck, that can actually turn out to be bad for you. Like if you become like instantly famous or instantly rich overnight or something like that, that can have a very bad effect. And in fact, one of the writers in the Renaissance who was a huge reader of Seneca, Petrarch, who was the founder of Renaissance humanism, he actually wrote a book on this idea, and it's like many, many volumes. It's like in the English edition, it's like this thick. And the English translation of this book is called Remedies for Fortune, Both Fair and Foul, or Remedies for Fortune, Both Good Fortune and Bad Fortune, because good fortune can actually turn out to be bad if you have too much of it.
That's fascinating. And I remember in your book, you had a nice illustration of I think it was a medieval print of the wheel. And there's
Wheel
these
of Fortune.
characters. These characters are kind of clinging, and they're up and down. Some are on the bottom. So, according to what you're saying, I mean, there can be just this constant, alteration of our fortune, even moment by
Oh,
moment.
right. Yeah. Because the Wheel of Fortune is fortune lifts you up and then it takes you down. And this is something that Seneca warned about, is that, basically, once you reach the top of your field, say that you're an actor or a politician or whatever, you reach the very pinnacle of success in your field. Well, there's only one place you can go after that, and that's down. So,
Yeah.
and then Seneca also said, if things are going bad for you, don't, give up. Because if you hit bottom, the opposite is true. If you hit bottom in life, the only place you can go is up, or you could stay there, I suppose. But things are always changing, and fortuna is fickle, and that's the problem with it. Whereas virtue is up to us, and regardless of what fortune brings to us, we can still respond to life in a virtuous way. And this was a central idea in Renaissance thought as well, and it all comes from Seneca. So, we modern Stoics are not the first people to entertain these ideas. It was going on in the Renaissance as well.
Yeah. So when things are going well, don't cling too tight, and when
Yeah,
things are going bad, they're going to change. So very cool. That's an
yeah,
awesome
hopefully.
image. Yeah,
So,
and as you're talking there, I'm thinking, we talk a lot about the dichotomy of control, but it can be a little bit of an abstract. It's almost like a Venn diagram type, but when you place it in terms of an image like fortune or fortuna, it just makes it so much more vivid. So that's
right,
credit
right.
to those writers.
Because when people talk about the dichotomy of control, it's almost like they're talking about a mathematical algorithm.
Yeah.
And, the idea of virtue versus fortune or chance, it does make it much more concrete, I think. I
Yeah.
agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So another set of ideas you tackle in your book, which I found, and this group, Minnesota Stoics, has talked a lot about Albert Ellis and
Oh,
REBT, or rational emotive behavior therapy. Can you tell us a little bit about how that relates to Seneca, and why you took a chunk of your a chapter to talk about Albert Ellis?
right. Well, it's just basically, I think it's for modern readers, it's a very significant fact that modern cognitive behavioral therapy was based on Stoic ideas. And Ellis was one of the founders of cognitive behavioral therapy, and what he would do is when he had a new client or patient, he would give them this saying from Epictetus, which is very famous, that it's not things that upset us, but it's our beliefs about things. And that right there is the cognitive theory of emotion. But this was not a new invention from the cognitive behavioral therapists. This was the cognitive theory of emotion was invented by the Stoics, and you find it, clearly stated in Epictetus, but you find it clearly stated in Seneca as well.
Excellent. Excellent. Oh, he's one of our favorites. So in kind of a broad sense, David, what does Stoicism bring to the table for modern people? And I think especially as, moderns have so many spiritual options out there. What does Stoicism bring to the table?
Mm. Well, I think that's a very hard question to answer in a sense, because it goes back to what I was saying before, that there are so many different types of people interested in Stoicism. But I think if I was going to generalize, I think one of the major attractions of Stoicism is that it's sort of like a rational form of spirituality, and it doesn't really require a lot of metaphysical or, for example, like religious beliefs. So for people who aren't religious, they can approach it as a rational form of spirituality. And if you look at Stoicism as a practice too, which modern people tend to see it that way, and of course the ancients did as well, then it's something very empirical. So you can just look at the types of things the Stoics were writing about and the kinds of exercises they give and things like that, and you can just try them out, and see if they actually make any sense or work for you. And so, when I was writing the book, especially, I tried to be a guinea pig, and I tried all the Stoic exercises out, to see how they would work in my life, and they worked pretty well. So I think that's one of the attractions, but it's still a little difficult for me to understand why Stoicism has taken off in the big way that it has. And one of the things that I just discovered recently, which I found to be shocking, is that, well, first of all, the book was translated into 16 languages, and that was shocking. But
your book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's published in 16 languages, so that was quite shocking. I think everyone was surprised by that. But then the other thing is that for some reason, which I totally don't understand, there's a huge interest in Stoicism in Brazil. And there's an edition of the book published in Brazil, which is called Coffee with Seneca. And that has become a bestseller. A friend of mine who's a Stoic scholar in Brazil and checked the translation, so it's like really accurate, just sent me a photo the other day of the book in an airport bookstore, and it said bestseller on top. And you go on Amazon in Brazil, and this is actually fun to do. You can use Google Chrome to translate all the reviews, but there are 780 reviews of the book in Brazil, and people just loved it. It has a 4.8 star rating, and it's all higher than the United States. For example, the United States has like 300 reviews or ratings now, but in Brazil it's 780. So this is something, and the book is the number 6 bestseller in ancient philosophy. So it's way above Ryan Holiday. So thank God there's some justice there finally. but in any event, so this is all very mysterious, and I would like to truly understand why these things happen. And maybe it's just fortuna. Maybe it's fortuna. I don't know.
Right.
But I would really like to understand why Brazil, has so many people interested in ancient philosophy and Stoicism. Maybe it would be a good place to go and live. I don't know.
Right.
If things keep declining in the U.S., you can go to Brazil.
Right. I was going to say we have I think we have one regular person that checks in from South America. I think we've had a couple. Well, any thoughts on yourself, David? Why would they be so interested in this topic?
I don't know. My friend there, his name is Aldo Dinucci,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like the leading scholar of Stoicism
Yeah.
in Brazil. And I met him at Stoicon and had a very nice dinner with him and with some other people. He's a friend of Kai Whiting, and we had a very nice dinner. And it was just fascinating, um, speaking with him. And one of the things I'll never forget is he said, well, the interest in Stoicism in Brazil is just, out of this world. And he said, there are 20 people in Brazil who are doing PhDs in Stoicism.
Mm.
So that makes Brazil obviously the, you know, country with the greatest, interest in Stoicism in the world. And why that is, I still have no idea. You know, I think I've asked him probably several times and never gotten an answer. So I just have no idea. But
Okay.
I noticed when the book came out in Brazil, it was like way, way up in like the Amazon sales. And now it has 780 reviews and people just loved it. And they really, understood the intent behind the book. And so why that is, and, it must be doing, better in Brazil than the United States and, England. So, why that is, it's a mystery.
Yeah,
So,
I suppose that in this international YouTube and Zoom world, anything can happen. So that's
yeah,
fascinating.
it's very strange.
Yeah. So, I've got 100 questions in my head, and I'm going to try to focus on what I what I had down here. But so for what would you say, David, after spending so much time with Seneca? They talk about like an elevator speech. What would you say are one or two of the greatest lessons that a modern person can take away from the study of Seneca?
Okay. I think that's a little hard to say because everyone is different. But what I would say is that I think it's quite clear. For example, if you read Seneca's letters to Lucilius, um, that one of his main messages in the letters is that uh, if you're interested in Stoicism, everyone should try to make a little bit of progress each day to become more virtuous and to improve our character. And whether you're interested in Stoicism or not, that's very good advice. And so I certainly agree with Seneca on that. And then, there, so in terms of the other takeaways from Seneca, I think it really depends on your personality, maybe what appeals to you the most. But a couple of things that really appeal to me is this idea that if you feel a very, very strong emotional reaction coming on, you should pause and take a step back and really, examine and scrutinize the emotion and, why are you feeling that way and what's behind it. So that's, what people now call cognitive distancing. So really, before you get sucked into, some kind of crazy emotion, like I've recently seen with my landlord here, we've just been going through this incredible ordeal. And it's like dealing with someone who is totally out of their mind. But anyways, take a step back and don't get swept away emotionally like that. And the other thing is don't make assumptions. And so basically what Seneca says is that, and Epictetus says this as well, and Marcus Aurelius says it, they all say this, is that you should suspend making judgments as much as possible. And you should never make judgments if you're unsure about the evidence, because things just happen. For example, you could like send an email to someone and they don't respond to you. And it's very easy to start creating these imaginary judgments and then emotional reactions in your mind, like, oh, this person ghosted me or I've been snubbed or whatever. And it might be that they just never received your email or they were incredibly busy. And I actually had this happen recently, and I was just wondering what was going on. And I had like a mutual colleague, basically, check in on this person. And then he wrote back to me and said, oh, I'm so sorry I didn't get back in touch with you. I was just incredibly busy because he works at a school, and the semester just started. So really, I think that whole idea of suspending judgments as much as possible is very, very healthy for people.
Yeah, even those 3, 4 skills you mentioned, if people just, if we could just, I was a school teacher, David, for many years, and
Oh,
if we could
mhm.
even train children in just a few of those cognitive ideas, it could make such a difference
Yeah,
in their
yeah.
lives. So yeah, last on the last chapter we talked about, for your book, we talked about your practice of, I think it's called testing your impressions, which goes along with what you've been saying here. So that excellent practice too. As we wrap up, now we're pushing the half-hour mark. I don't want to push it much farther than that, David. You're so generous with your time today. But could you talk about any writing projects or other projects coming up for you? Anything you'd like to share with the group?
Right. Well, I've been doing a lot of research into Stoicism and the Renaissance, and I have a new website that covers that and other topics related to the Renaissance. It's called Living Ideas Journal. And if you just Google Living Ideas Journal, you can find it. And I think I can actually do like a screen share of this too, if I'm technologically adept. So let's see here. I can do this. This is like good practice for me. So let's see if I can hit the
Sure.
screen here and
Take a breath here. Don't just,
see
yeah.
if this works. Yeah, I mean, all of this online stuff is not exactly intuitive. Share screen. My God, there's a button for it. What do
There
you?
you go. Yeah.
Okay, so anyways,
Here we go.
so can you see it?
Yes. Perfect.
So this is the website, and there are all these articles, and I will have an article. Actually, this article here, How Philosophy Changed the World, is essentially on Stoicism in the Renaissance.
Okay.
And so it covers Petrarch, who started Renaissance humanism, and the influence of Seneca and Cicero on Renaissance humanism, and the influence of Greek philosophy on the Renaissance. So I would highly recommend that. And then I'm also starting this educational program in Italy, and you can click through to it. And it's actually this November, and there are 15 people coming from all around the world. It's in Florence, and there's still 5 places left. So if anyone wants to come, you have to act quickly because it's closing on Monday. But I've been working on this for 2 years, and I've had a bunch of incredible collaborations with people there, including the International Studies Institute and the British Institute of Florence. And we have a symposium as well, where we will be talking about ancient philosophy in the Renaissance. And I'll be talking about Stoicism, and we have stuff on Neoplatonism and Corpus Hermeticum, the Hermetic tradition as well. So in any case, this has been, it's taken over my life. And I've been working like 14 hours a day to organize this. And I'm giving like 5 talks there, including one at the British Institute of Florence. So it's turned into, this very grandiose thing, which is quite fun. And so it's really been wonderful to work with all these people. I've made a lot of new friends, and I've just become engrossed by the Renaissance and how the ideas from the Renaissance could contribute to our world today in terms of education. For example, I'm going to give a whole talk on because actually it was the Renaissance humanists that invented modern education, and they have incredibly valuable ideas about education for the modern world that we've totally forgotten. I mean, we've totally forgotten that they invented the educational system that we have, the humanities. And we've forgotten the idea that the whole purpose of the humanities, which they invented, was to create more virtuous people and a more virtuous society. And guess what? They got these ideas from the Stoics. So there's there's all of this incredible influence that has come to the modern world. And now we have an educational system that has totally lost its way. And one of the reasons I think that the humanities are failing is because there's no common aim any longer. And in the Renaissance, there was a common aim behind the humanities, and that was to create more virtuous people who could create a better society, better political leaders, better leaders in every field, people who could entertain ideas, communicate well, because they lived in a free republic, and so there had to be discussions, there had to be debates, and then look at the politicians we have today. So, without being too political, look at these damn choices that we have in the United States, in a country of, nearly 350 million. Biden or Trump, Hillary or Trump. You would think that in a country with 350 million people, we would be able to come up with better political choices than these choices that I personally find to be quite depressing, or like a farce, actually. So there are a lot of things that we can learn from the Renaissance, because the Renaissance gave birth to the modern world, and we've now departed from all of those ideas. So it might be a good time to take a look back at what they were really thinking about then, and see if we could recalibrate things in some kind of way.
Good for you. That's very inspiring. As a former teacher of humanities and art, it's very inspiring. So when you email me and say you have a million things on your plate, David, I'm prone to believe you now. So good luck
Yeah,
with that. So
yeah, yeah.
well, so what I would like to do is I'm going to try to be mindful of my time here. And then I'm going to ask you if you have any other thoughts you want to share with our group here. Otherwise, if you have a few minutes yet, I'm sure there would be probably a few people that have a question for you. David, do you
Yes,
have a couple more minutes?
yes.
Okay. Any
Yeah.
final thoughts, though, before we kind of wrap up our formal
No, no,
talk here?
no.
Okay.
And if people want to, join in on the video and ask a question directly to me, that's fine with me.
Okay.
And I see that we're sort of short on time. I could go another 20 minutes, though,
Perfect.
so
Yeah.
that people have a chance. I have
Yeah.
an appointment at 1:30
Sure.
because I got roped into doing something on Stoicon,
Oh,
like a
sure.
week from
Sure.
today. And
Yeah.
they have like a video test or something like that. So I have to do that.
Well, that'd be
But
great.
I can
I can
go
kind of
I
mark
can
our
go
time.
longer because I'd
Yeah.
like to talk to people. And
Perfect. Well, then what we'll do is we'll just, as we normally do, please raise your digital hand as best, and then I'll call on people as they raise their hand, and then we'll proceed from there. But Jonathan, you have a question for David. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have kind of a comments and somewhat of a request, or I'm curious. Yeah, I was very interested in your program in Italy this fall, and I couldn't make it. I work at a university myself, and that week we actually have a symposium that I coordinate. It's for undergraduate research, and it does tend to be heavily STEM and psychology, and we do have a little bit of humanities and somewhat. So I do hope, number one, that you will run the program again, or something similar. So I'd love to have the chance, fate willing, to participate. And I do hope, I'm curious about the symposium, and you mentioning the humanities and the Renaissance, and a lot of these ideas that you're going to be discussing, and it's getting my wheels churning here in the head, for something we could do here at the University of Memphis. And we are we've started a classics minor, and it's growing, so I'd like to hear your ideas on the symposium. Not today necessarily, but like what I'd like, if that's going to be recorded and shared at some point, and that what you're going to be discussing in Florence at some point down the road, that'd be great. And I guess that's all I had to say. And just say I've enjoyed your book, Breakfast with Seneca. It was introduced to me through this group, and I've listened to it, and now I'm kind of reading it now. I'm halfway through, and I'm pairing it with the letters themselves. So
Oh,
that's a great. I'm really getting a lot out of it, going through it kind of methodically, and reading a few letters uh, uh, a day or every other day, or somewhat, and then getting a chance to read a couple of your chapters every day. So I just wanted to make that comment, and I appreciate you putting that together.
yeah, that's really great what you're doing. I'm very glad to hear about that. And actually, one of the talks I'm giving is a public lecture at the British Institute of Florence. I just pasted the link to it, and it's called What It Meant to Be Human in the Renaissance. So it's about like philosophical ideas about human nature. It draws on Stoicism and other ancient philosophies. There's a lot of Stoicism in it. And then it deals with Renaissance theories of education. And this is going to be a 2-hour presentation. I'm working on it right now. And there will be a video recording of it made. So if anyone would like